Mac, can you tell the good people what we're using this tool for?
Yeah. So a lot of what we at Data Strategy Professionals are using ChatGPT for is, in particular for my role, is research. Research is one of the functionalities that's really been developed well with large language models, partly because they're just exceptionally good at search. This is something that I personally use it a lot for, but also the likes of writing, a little bit of data analytics, and then a lot of like resource creation. So there are a variety of different use cases that we would be using it for, but of course that's going to largely depend on what are the particular tasks that this can effectively support and substitute. Here's a brief overview of what you can expect today. Our aims are to firstly introduce AI tool options, use cases, limitations, but maybe you haven't yet got a subscription. It doesn't necessarily need to be to ChatGPT. It could be some of the other tools available, but hopefully this can be an opportunity for you to understand, is that additional functionality worth paying for you? In terms of what we'll cover, just touching on some like disclaimers, my experience with ChatGPT, and then we'll be diving into AI tools, different use cases, finally having a live prompt section and talking about some of the key limitations for current AI tools. So, in terms of disclaimers, I am not myself a working data practitioner. I have knowledge about and experience working with data, but I don't fit into any of the kind of standard models of being a data analyst, being a data steward. I am also not certified. So, I really do want to use your own interests to help gauge what is worth prioritizing in terms of, say, the live showcase in particular. In terms of what we're discussing, there's a lot that we just won't be able to cover. So we don't go into any like deep technical stuff. We don't go into the deep limitations that some of these models have. But I strongly encourage you to explore this in your own time if it feels interesting. I'm not an expert also in either technical AI or optimization for productivity. I have a decent amount of experience with using it for productivity purposes. And I have a moderately strong technical knowledge, but I definitely would not claim to be an expert. Finally, a lot of what we discuss here is so rapidly changing. So, for example, I just incorporate one thing that came out several days ago where GPT-4 may be a relevant consideration now. It's not impossible that within the next 6 months we get GPT-5 being released, let alone what other models might be released by others. So, hopefully, the general use cases we discuss can transfer to any future state. But just wanted to clarify that there might be some specific things which diminish in their relevance over time. In terms of my experience, mainly used GPT-4, which is the paid version with OpenAI's model. I've used it for a few different things, like just trying to think about what I might be working on, research, writing, creating resources, but also a few different things as well. Finally, if you're newer to using tools, I personally would suggest adopting an attitude of assuming that ChatGPT or whatever AI tool you're using is broadly able to do whatever you want it to, overcomes a very understandable barrier that we often have to entry, which is how do I actually start using this thing? I would suggest really try to overcome that initial hump, investigate whether there is, in fact, something that you can do with it. And then you can come to, okay, this is actually going to be highly valuable for fulfilling this task. So feel free to go through that as a process yourself whenever useful. So, jumping into AI tools then. This is a exceptionally basic diagram of how ChatGPT works. ChatGPT is a generative AI. It is an application on top of the model, which is a large language model. That's the actual AI, as it were. Essentially, these AIs, they get trained and then they get stacked into or attached to an application, which is what you as a user would be interacting with. And from this application, there are a whole bunch of different outputs it can produce. This is what we're going to really be focusing on is the different use cases, the live showcase to understand what can these models actually do for you. So this is the extent of what we're going to go into right now. For technical details, I would strongly recommend checking out what OpenAI have actually offered in terms of about GPT-4 in particular, but there's a whole bunch of information online and we can point you in the right direction. In terms of GPT-4 to 3.5, these are two different models, GPT-4 being the more recent advanced model. This is a common diagram on the right-hand side to indicate the relative exam performance. And that's just one way to benchmark performance, but it really demonstrates that you get a lot of additional functionality just in basic processing. So maybe like reasoning skills, mathematical skills, so on and so forth with GPT-4 over 3.5. But there are a whole bunch of additional features as well. So I would say the most important is the GPT store, where you can get specialized GPTs to work with very particular skill sets. You can also upload files, which is exceptionally useful, particularly if you want to do, say, data analytics. You can actually upload an Excel spreadsheet, .csv, whatever it may be. It also has internet searchability. So 3.5 is currently constrained to when it was trained up until. For example, if it was trained up until end of 2023, it only has access to information pre-2024. So we want to try and get access to live internet, and that's something that GPT-4 can do while not 3.5. It also has what's called a larger context window, which essentially means you can write more when you're giving it a prompt. For example, upload a whole book to GPT-4, whereas 3.5 could only do a quarter of that book. So that's really useful for longer prompts. In terms of pricing, it's $20 a month. I also want to emphasize that there are other LLMs out there, and some of these are quite rapidly developing. So those of us who are keeping up with this stuff may be aware that Anthropic, which is one of the three leading AGI labs, they released Claude 3, and there are three different models. We're not going to get into those at the moment. But essentially, as you can see, we have really good data about performance across a bunch of different benchmarks. Now, how these benchmarks transfer to use cases you care about is really important for understanding what's actually going to do for you personally. But regardless, just being aware that there are alternatives to ChatGPT and that these often come with different use cases, which are particularly good. For example, I've heard that Claude 3 is particularly strong for creative writing, not necessarily so relevant here, but nonetheless useful to be aware that there are differences and that the different pricings between these might also make it worthwhile for you to consider. Finally, we actually did a write up recently for our newsletter about AI co-pilots, and that there are a bunch of different tools. We haven't been able to test these out, so we can't verify how effective they are, but nonetheless, there are a few things around which you might be interested in exploring for yourself as either an alternative to just using an LLM, or it could supplement any additional functionality. For example, you wanted specific data preparation capacity. So these are definitely worthwhile to explore as well. Awesome. So these are the 5 use cases that we're going to be highlighting. And I really want to emphasize that there are a whole bunch of additional ones. We'll come in a moment to the limitations, where these are pretty much what I have like major experience with. I feel able to highlight specific examples. But if you do find that there are limitations to what we cover, that's hopefully where the showcase can be a supplement, where it can actually dive into the needs and questions that yourselves have, which are currently being represented so strongly amongst these use cases. There are a whole bunch of nuances that we're not going to go into. So, for example, like prompt engineering is a really important part of getting AI to do what you want it to, or do things simply better. I will, however, shortly share Anthropic. They recently released a prompt library. Some are for prompts and use cases, which would be very relevant to a number of data practitioner roles. So we'll touch on that very briefly. And then finally, when I was testing and using the GPT-4 specialized GPTs, there were inconsistencies. Sometimes I'd use the base model, sometimes I'd use this specialized GPT. So essentially, I wouldn't take this as a very rigorous scientific inquiry of how do these different use cases perform under different circumstances, whether it's specialized, whether it's base model. So that's just something, again, to keep in mind. In terms of later, we will have a live showcase where we're going to take your prompts, or the most popular prompts. Please share them in the Q&A on Slido. And then we're going to have a look at how do these things perform. So this will be an exceptionally important part of figuring out how useful this might actually be to you in a live demonstration. So that's something, again, to keep in mind. You can share prompts. It doesn't need to be this exact format that I highlight at the bottom, but please do specify if something is a prompt, if something is a question, so that we can distinguish between them, because the prompt is for the live showcase, the question is for the Q&A at the very end. Now, we're just going to have a very quick look at this database, because this will help contextualize the use cases we'll go into. But you can also start to think about, are there prompts you're particularly interested in, maybe with inspiration from Anthropic's prompt library. This is a sample database from Tableau. We've used this for the analytics showcase we'll be having in a moment. I just wanted to share with you what this looks like because you might be interested for the live showcase to have me use a specific prompt on this data. It'll also hopefully give you a bit of context for what we did in terms of the data analytics section. Here is a very recently released prompt library from Anthropic. This is here to help clarify what could be potentially useful for interacting with AI. So, for example, there are a whole bunch of different ones which might be particularly useful to data practitioners. You'll notice that Anthropic have essentially kept it to a single example per use case, but there are a whole bunch of resources about this now. You'll notice that there are some general formulas which are really useful. There's a bunch of literature on prompt engineering if you're interested, but just having something like you are an expert and such to really get the right parameters working for you to perform whatever task it is as effectively as possible. We're just going to have a look through some examples of how these use cases can be performed. The main one that I want to start with is just writing. Now, the reason why we talk here is because although data analytics will be important for some roles, for other data practitioner roles, writing and communication is going to be a more central set of skills. So here we have writing a sample piece, but a highlight here at the bottom is we have specialized GPTs being used. So this one uses Write for Me, which is again a GPT-4 model, but it's been fine-tuned as an application for writing in particular. The idea is that it's better able to perform that particular set of skills. And you'll notice that I use different specialized GPTs for a number of the different use cases so that you're maximizing performance where possible. Generating a writing sample, you might just want to consult GPT-4 or on like how to do something. And again, specialized GPTs are exclusive to GPT-4. But also just having the likes of generating ideas. So this might be something where you just want to brainstorm. And then finally, feedback. Feedback is an exceptionally valuable part because it's something you can always get, whether you're generating the content or not. It's a really valuable way to improve something rapidly. And another thing that GPT-4 can do is you can take a screenshot. If you don't want to worry about copying, for example, the context window for ChatGPT doesn't allow for hyperlinks. Maybe you just take a screenshot so that it recognizes there are hyperlinks and then it can give more direct feedback. So yeah, really valuable to think about how it can improve writing because of how powerful it is for writing purposes. Here are a selection of specialized GPTs. These again are the fine-tuned applications which you can find in the GPT store with a GPT-4 subscription. Now, this one might be especially relevant for a number of us, and I go into a little bit more detail just with a couple of additional things. But essentially, what I wanted to show is that with Data Analyst, you can do a few different things. For example, basic analyses, just trying to understand the averages from that data set we had a look at just before. But it can also do some basic inferential statistics. So you can actually get correlations between what are the sales figures for this product versus this product to understand the bundles that very naturally exist. You can actually do quite a lot on the basic side of analyses. There's also data visualization. So whenever you do an analysis, it'll automatically be generating a graph as well. Here we have the total amount of profit year from again this data set. Here we have fluctuations in sales between different products. This is all created within 30 seconds at the very most. So you're getting a lot of functionality, and that data set has a lot of items. I believe it's like 10,000 rows, and then it has what, 20 different columns? So this is like a moderate amount of data, and it's able to perform very effectively. For most of these results, they have gone and verified them manually, and it is pretty consistently accurate. How you implement your own data quality checks to make sure that you are, in fact, getting accurate information is something that you can consider for yourself. But I definitely think that this is a fast way to get results, particularly where accuracy may not be necessary all the time. And then you can set up some additional measures to make sure that accuracy is maintained as well. You can also just query information. So this came from very organically me making a mistake. I didn't realize that this customer actually came up in the data set multiple times. But not only did it recognize that it came up multiple times, it recognized that this person's information was across multiple instances of different cities and that these instances were littered throughout the data set. We'd call this the needle in the haystack, where it's trying to find specific information, one small piece, in this massive data set, as it were. So it was able to not only do this for my prompt, which is find this one person, what was their customer ID, what city, but it actually found every single instance of this person and they were spread throughout. They were entry 1000, entry 2000. It wasn't a single thing, which shows that it's able to pay attention to the document as a whole pretty darn well. This is actually a limitation we'll come back to at the very end. A really useful thing to think about is, can I just learn something about the data set itself? Awesome. Here we have this course by Udemy, which is about using the data analyst specialized GPT for specific use cases, but not also aware of any additional specialized GPTs for data analysis. This is something that will likely change over time, but at the moment, this is pretty good for basic analytics, and that you might want to explore the likes of a Udemy course to better understand how you can apply it. So, research, finding key ideas. There are a couple of different applications that I personally use on a regular basis. One is for internet search, the other is for academic literature, but it's exceptionally valuable to use these things to just find information. Linking to sources, this is one of the advantages that we've seen in specialized GPTs. They're just much better at sourcing information. Something that we'll probably be pretty familiar with now is that hallucinations are a consistent problem with current AI. Essentially, they will inaccurately present information, and getting accurate links to sources is a really important part of research. So, this is something which can help massively to verify the quality of information you're engaging with. Also, summarization. So it's just really good. You can essentially just ask for, here is the URL to this paper or the DOI, and summarize that paper for me. But GPT-4 is just really good at condensing down information to be much more manageable. So again, this is something really useful to think about for anyone interested in research. Specialized GPTs here. Consensus is the one that I personally would suggest and use for academic literature. The internet search one is not featured here, but check it out if you're interested. Images, we'll just jump through this a little bit more quickly. Maybe you're wanting to improve data governance and you think data literacy is like the crux of improving things. And you want to promote this in a way that makes it easier for people who might feel intimidated by data to engage. So maybe you want to put some promotional material together that helps make people feel welcome, less intimidated. This could be one way to do it. And naturally, the accuracy of spelling, the fact that it came out as well as it did, it is unusual, but nonetheless, it's something you can go and manually touch up at a later time as well. Visual interest for anyone who's wanting to communicate ideas is useful with images. There's a bunch of additional things. It could be like logo creation. This is just me playing around with data strategy professionals. It does spell professionals incorrectly, but nonetheless can show where things could go in the future. And then finally, feedback. If you put together an infographic, you're wanting to maximize its clarity of communication, how effectively does it achieve what you're wanting it to achieve? Another additional use case I thought is just generally useful is the likes of planning. For example, I was telling it in a prompt that I had like several projects and these are the timelines for each of them. I need to allocate time between them each over however many weeks. And then it goes ahead and specifies like this might be a way to do that. So again, you don't want to take it at face value. You always want to critically engage with outputs from LLMs. But nonetheless, this is one way to approach it because it does seem like a strong opportunity. Stick to your goal. I didn't find that Schedule Architect did that much for me here, but I do think that using GPT-4 generally for what are the steps to my goal is quite powerful because one of the primary constraints for a lot of goal setting is the ability to understand what are the practical steps to get the goal. This is more for ideational purposes than something you would output in and of itself, but you might find it useful to create little diagrams to understand, like, how do I communicate data governance to people? And this kind of application, like diagrams show me, can be one way to just get a brainstorm together of what you might want to then go and do at a later time. So we have another poll here, and we just want to understand which of these use cases do you think would be useful? Select all that apply because this can help us tailor what we cover in the future to make sure that this is going to be as relevant as possible for data practitioners. Beautiful. That's really nice and clear. So now we're going to be jumping into this live showcase. I'm just going to be using for demonstration purposes the base model for the most part. I've got one prompt here. what is the best way to convince leadership at my company that it's worth investing in data quality? Let's just pop it in. Yeah, and this seems like a very common issue that many data practitioners are likely to have. So again, this is just base model. There's a whole lot of additional prompt engineering that can go into improving answers, but this can hopefully help to clarify if you've used GPT 3.5 and how does this as an outcome seem to you relative to that? Now, this is just one approach, and maybe we can do some multi-shot approach so we can go back and forth. We really want to elaborate on business goals. It's really good at picking up any issues with spelling and such, but essentially you can work through whatever seems most valuable. Now, it'll often do by point. You can actually request formatting issues, but yeah, that's definitely valuable to look at. Understanding how can I continue to work through something that does seem particularly useful. So I've just got a prompt here about change management. Change management is a big problem at my company. So again, like one thing I'd strongly recommend is if you want your prompt to be highly specific, give it context and be clear about specifying. For example, we might put in context. So I'm noticing that for prompts, that the two that we've had so far, very much in this ideation planning, I think that trying to use LLMs for improving one's own reasoning is one of the soft use cases we didn't talk about, but is an exceptionally powerful one. We're going back and forth to try and improve your ability to think clearly and to understand problems and such. I think is actually just generally speaking, one of the strongest use cases. It doesn't come up cleanly, but this is definitely one way to massively improve your own ability to think and plan. Good,
Somebody
all good?
asked in the chat about using the diagrams. Show me.
Yeah, sure thing. Yep, we can jump over to that. So again, this is showing how the store works as well. This is the one that I was using and showcasing before. I'm wondering for yourself who popped that in the chat there, is there anything in particular you'd like me to try create a diagram for? Oh, yeah, awesome. Depending on how much is required in terms of computation for a given task, it can take a little bit of time. So what I'm thinking is while we wait, I can just answer the current top question. We've got question like, how do I get to GPTs in the app? So yeah, we've literally just demonstrated that. It's always just going to be explore GPTs. Then there are the different sections that you can go into. Okay. So I'm not familiar with this particular GPT, and it looks like this is trying to like have a certain aesthetic, which is a little bit more natural. But again, like for the purpose of just in clarifying your thinking and maybe informing the likes of infographic that you want to put together, these are the kinds of use cases that I think the current diagram functionality offers. I personally wouldn't worry too much about take this, use it, unless you felt it was sufficient for ideation purposes and communication around what I should then go and manually create. That's where I think things are particularly useful. Hopefully, this is just something which helps clarify if you can see value in this for your role. Some of us maybe already have a GPT Plus subscription, and this isn't something that you're considering as a question. But what we have here is another poll to understand, did this help inform your decision making? But this is again just trying to understand what is the purpose of this live showcase? Is it providing value where possible? And it's a totally valid response if you're like, this is clarified that I don't want to get GPT-4. This is not about convincing you to buy a product, which I have no stake in at all. This is about, is this useful? And am I supporting you to make those decisions? Because $20 a month may be quite a lot for some of us. It's important to allocate our resources effectively. In terms of how you might use it in your role, you might think about the first principles of starting to use AI. Just assume it can do what you do. And then it's about how do I explicitly tell someone? So if I had an assistant, what would I tell them to do, assuming they were a capable assistant? This can immediately help to get you thinking about what do I do from here? Do I, A, try and specify what I would do as a manager? B, just what do I do in myself? So on and so forth. This can be really valuable to figuring out what you want to do with an AI application. So we're just going to briefly talk about some of the limitations. As I mentioned before, hallucinations really the crux problem of AI at the moment, where they just get things wrong. You may have seen in the media that Google DeepMind's Gemini model was pushing a bunch of images, which were like really odd in terms of historical representation of diversity, a non-white person who was a German soldier and such. So it's just getting things wrong. And this is quite tricky to avoid. There are some workarounds. I've seen one which was able to avoid them for a very specific use case. Generally speaking, what the language model underneath, say ChatGPT, is doing is it's predicting. It's trying to predict what the kind of idea should be based on the previous things that it's already been putting together and the user's prompt. It just gets things wrong at times. It's going to get better and better over time. That seems increasingly likely based on trends, but it is going to get things inaccurate. So always make sure you're grounding out in something you can verify. For example, sources, really important for research purposes, but you can also manually verify analytics and such. If you're like, oh, that's much too labor intensive, think about how important is it to you that this figure that you've generated from GPT-4 is accurate or not. If this is like the key to your sales performance this year, this might be a really important thing to get accurate. So you want to go and verify you have additional data quality measures in place to really make sure that the important figures are accurate to avoid hallucination. Reading all of the files. So I talked about needle in a haystack earlier. Something we can see here is that GPT-4 tends to get worse at finding information when that information is further along in a document. So we might think about this for a data set as well, where maybe row 7500, column 15, it's less likely to pick up on information from that area. We don't understand entirely why, but this is something that we've seen for GPT-4. It's gotten better over time, but this is nonetheless an issue. Others have been like particularly good. For example, I think Claude 3 has been particularly good at resolving this problem. And you can see a similar diagram where it's not really encountering any issues with finding information throughout very long documents. I think 1 million token context windows are now becoming the norm of frontier models, which is like massive amount of information, thousands of pages. Also, adherence to instructions. Sometimes it just does not pay attention to what you've actually given, and it may just be inaccurate. It's similar to a hallucination. There's a key detail that you requested of it, and it just was not doing that. Finally, writing style. It tends to be very flowery, and you can reduce this through specifying something in your prompt, but also just using custom instructions. So if you're not familiar with custom instructions, this is something which will influence to some extent the of all ChatGPT's responses based on these settings that you've created for your profiles. So it says, please do not use flowery language, and that will reduce the rates of flowery language that ChatGPT outputs. We are going to be specifically looking at questions. So, what are some of your favorite places to learn about the latest? Yeah, so my priority actually is AI safety. This is what I pay attention to the most. AI safety is a concern, and I would strongly argue that it is a really big concern. In terms of technical developments, if you want something that's engaging, thorough, and very time efficient, AI Explained is a YouTube channel which does a pretty darn good job not only responding very quickly to new developments, he can have a video up the evening of a new technical report being released. He goes through the key points. So it's very good for time efficiency. It's just really good for highlighting what are some of the most important things. Because there's so much happening, Explained is a strong one in my opinion. Also, Twitter is a very common place for, say, OpenAI staff to be talking about new developments. Oh, what is AI safety? I'll try to avoid getting on my pedestal and talking about how important thing this is. AI safety covers a few different scenarios. AI safety is concerned with what is the potential for AI to cause harm to humans. AI safety is trying to look at the biggest problems. So I would argue that the number one problem in terms of overall potential risk is existential risk. This is where I might become sufficiently advanced that we'd call it superintelligence. This is something which might achieve sometime after becoming comparable to human intelligence. And if it has different goals to what humans have, then there becomes a very natural competition. There are limited resources, and we each have an incentive to use those resources. It kind of puts us on a collision course, is one of the key ideas there. There's also references to misuse. So maybe a bad actor gets something and they want to do cybercrime, or maybe they shut down world infrastructure. It could also be that they gain access to nuclear weapons, whatever it may be. So it's trying to understand how can we best deploy and develop safe AI. Do you think GPT has a world model? Essentially, I do. I think it's one of these difficult questions. So, if anyone's familiar with the P zombie argument, the philosophical zombie, where you can have something that looks, for all intents and purposes, like a person, but it doesn't have consciousness. I think one of the strongest arguments against this as being a thing is essential, but it's there. So, for example, there are diagrams which demonstrate that the way that information is distributed in the neural net seems to be like clustered into specific regions. Essentially, I would say is like a proto world model because it is clustering information based on distinct characteristics. That's getting a bit into the technical, maybe. To what extent is token prediction distinct from a world model? Because you have a world model, you're better at predicting. That's a very interesting question. There's a paper from Anthropic which is looking at interpretability, understanding what's going on under the hood. Super difficult and opaque question at the moment, but Anthropic released something which was actually starting to find some units of what's going on. And these were clusters of specific neurons which would perform specific use cases. So we've got prompt here. What privacy/security concerns should we consider? Oh, this is a good question. I don't feel sufficiently informed to probably say anything on this. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to help you, but it's a good question because there could well be additional things related to GPT-4. I'm just not familiar. I suppose actually the only thing I might think about it is that OpenAI have more of your information and there have been some concerns raised about OpenAI. For example, you pretty much can't delete your account as far as I'm aware. When do you think AI will take the jobs of people who work in data? So we actually did a write about this at the beginning of the year, which was a newsletter exploring job projections on the basis of advances in AI. I think honestly, it's going to vary for different types of roles, which rely more on specific tasks. So I would expect that analytics, modeling, anything which is more technically focused is probably going to go first. When is a more challenging question. And again, these are my assumptions based on current trends in capabilities, but I definitely think that technical is where most machine learning researchers seem to think things will go. Robotics has really come along just in the last few weeks. We've had some updates about robotics being much more advanced. That's an AI safety term. What is the probability of humanity going extinct? I'm not going to worry about that at the moment, but it's like sufficiently high for me to be transitioning into AI governance research. I think more people skills are likely to have a degree more future proofing, given the rate of development that we're seeing and the fact that I'm increasingly seeing people, these AGI labs like Sam Altman, we're putting AGI timelines on like 2030 and later in, like I'm seeing 2028 referred to a few times. So maybe data analytics is out in January and data stewards are out in September. It does seem to be the case that technical skills are more likely to go earlier. It's really difficult to tell because capabilities develop at variable rates and we don't know what trends are going to hold, what will fall down, so on and so forth. What is your favorite way to use ChatGPT? Well, in terms of like versus others, it's because GPT-4 has just been the front runner in performance for pretty much its whole time since coming out until very recently. So there is now like reasonable competition from what Google and Anthropic have put out. This is like Claude 3 from Anthropic, Gemini 1.5, particularly Ultra from Google DeepMind. I don't currently have a strong argument for it other than the fact that I'm familiar with GPT-4. But this is actually like a very relevant question for me. I do want to explore them and try them as well because there might be particular use cases. I would say one thing that I've seen others talk about on this is that the GPT store is a game changer. But again, that's like broad. Whereas if you have a very specific use case, then you actually have much more information to go on, which is going to be the most valuable to you in terms of like sheer performance. I can very quickly show the custom instructions. So you can just have a look, click on your use, and then you'll see that custom instructions comes up as one of the things. Customize ChatGPT, and then you can specify a couple of things about how you want your GPT to run. Hopefully, this has given you much more context for understanding how you can use ChatGPT or other AI tools as data practitioners, because I do think that these really efficient ways to leverage your skills and try to maximize performance in an increasingly competitive world.
Thank you
Have a
so much,
lovely day.
Mac. Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. This was really fun. And Mac writes our newsletter. So if you want to follow more of our research on the latest trends for data management professionals, definitely sign up for the newsletter. Check it out as you go about the rest of your day.
Awesome.
Thank you guys so much for coming.
Take care,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.